Recall that in one of the earlier podcasts, we said that one effective way to resolve moral disagreements is by defining crucial terms and trying to get all interested parties to accept the definition. When we begin to think about this distinction between killing and letting die, we will have to agree to some definitions. For example, we should come up with an adequate definition of the word kill. This is the task undertaken by Grisez and Boyle in their paper in our textbook. They propose a definition in order to see what implications follow and how the proposed definition might help us in gaining a clearer vision of the discussion overall. Their proposed definition follows. In the strict sense, one kills a person when, having considered bringing about a person's death as something one could do, one commits oneself to doing it by adopting this proposal instead of some alternative and by undertaking to execute it. Now, we might want at this point to question whether this is an adequate definition. But let's look first at some of the implications the authors mention that follow from this definition. First, every act of killing is immoral, since life is good and every act of killing seeks to destroy life. Second, there is no morally relevant distinction between intent to kill, attempt to kill, and successful killing. Third, if one commits oneself as a killer, one constitutes oneself a murderer. We should ask ourselves at this point whether we are happy with these implications. For example, what do we think about the suggestion that mere intent to kill is morally equivalent to successful killing? The law makes allowances for conspiracy to kill, attempted murder, and murder, with increasing severity of punishment. Why should the law build this into the court system if each of them is on a moral par? Let's look at a different distinction the authors make between killing and deadly deeds. Deadly deeds, such as those committed by the enraged wife and the dutiful soldier, are those that are intentionally performed, but the intention is not to kill. A third category is causing death, into which self-defense falls. This proposed definition stands to make some moral issues a bit clearer. Take suicide, for example. As I mentioned in the previous podcast, suicide is broadly defined as an act of death in which the last crucial step is taken by the person who dies. But if the word kill is to be defined in the author suggested way, then suicides are, to be more specific, results of a reasoning process that takes into account several alternatives and then chooses the one that ends in the reasoner's death. Consider the reasoning process represented in the text. This is a quote. I wish I no longer had to suffer as I am suffering. If I were dead, my suffering would be at an end. But I am not likely to die soon. I could kill myself, but I fear death and what might follow after it. I could put up with my misery and perhaps find some other way out. Now notice the phrase, I could kill myself. This classifies it as an alternative among many, and the reasoner then chooses this option. Thus, according to the proposed definition, it's killing. And if it's killing, according to the authors, then it's immoral. The authors distinguish suicide from martyrdom. We'll talk about this in class. Let's look at what follows for the euthanasia debate, however. The authors claim that voluntary euthanasia is not significantly different from other cases of suicide. Notice how they say other cases of suicide. They aren't making the distinction we made earlier. Can you figure out why not? But there is one kind of exceptional circumstance they mention. A person in severe pain may not be reasoning in the way described in the definition. They may not see other alternatives to death, and therefore wouldn't be choosing death from a number of alternatives. If, however, the person has made plans ahead of time, say by making out an advance directive, then the reasoning could be said to have occurred when the person did have the various options in front of her. And any doctor who assists in an act of euthanasia is performing an act of killing. And since all acts of killing are immoral, all acts of physician-assisted death are immoral, at least on the part of the physicians. But you may ask, what about those cases of passive euthanasia? We thought there was a distinction between killing and letting die. Why would those physicians who might be said to let a patient die be guilty of killing? The authors argue that even these are cases of killing. They write, if one adopts the proposal to bring about a person's death, and realizes this proposal by not behaving as one otherwise would behave, then one is committed to the state of affairs which includes the person's death. This commitment is, morally speaking, an act of killing. There is then, according to Grisez and Boyle, no morally relevant distinction between killing and letting die. We'll see Rachels make the same claim, but conclude that in some circumstances both killing and letting die are morally permissible. Grisez and Boyle conclude, however, that both killing and letting die are morally impermissible.